Hey everyone, I'm Ray Belli, and this is Words for Granted, a podcast that looks at how words, or in the case of this episode, how scripts change over time. If you value this podcast as a free educational resource, you can support the show and get access to bonus episodes by making a monthly donation at patreon.com/wordsforgranted. Thanks to HT, Daryl, Greg, and Miko for their recent contributions. If Patreon isn't your thing, but you still want to support the show, you can make a one-time donation at paypal.me/wordsforgranted. Okay, let's get on to today's interview episode with Silvia Ferrara. Silvia is the author of the book The Greatest Invention, A History of the World in 9 Mysterious Scripts. She's also a professor of Aegean civilization at Bologna University in Italy, an expert in the decipherment of scripts, and the principal investigator of the interdisciplinary project Inscribe, which is an acronym that stands for Invention of Scripts and Their Beginnings. As you're about to hear, that's a project that Silvia herself helped get off the ground. Okay, let's dive in. Silvia, can you tell listeners a bit about your background and a bit about your work, and particularly the amazing work that Inscribe is doing?
Oh, thank you so much for mentioning my group and my team. And I'm really glad that that's the first question, actually, because I don't really want to talk about me. I want to talk about them. But basically, what I did 5 years ago was come up with an idea, and I pitched it to the European Commission, which has a fantastic grant program for innovative, original ideas that apply new methods to a big research question. And my research question was, how was writing invented in the world? How did the human species come to such a realization that we could turn whatever we do in speech into visible signs? And since it's a much debated question, there is still a lot to be learned and a lot of enigmas surrounding the invention of writing. What I wanted to do was to probe this from a different perspective, because people have assumed for so many years two things. One, that writing is the vehicle for language. It transmits language, and that's it. So it's a linguistic problem, basically. And the second one is that writing was invented only once in the world by the Sumerians in the 4th millennium BC in Mesopotamia, modern-day southern Iraq. But now we know that the situation has changed quite a lot, and we see different inventions in the world in different periods. So I wanted to sort of look at writing from more perspectives, really, from more sides, not just the linguistic one. And I wanted to understand how shapes that we see in writing systems have looked the way that they do. What is it that makes a shape more selectable than another, and icons and drawings and things like that, like schematic and geometric signs, how do they end up being channeled into a writing system, into a repertoire of signs, an inventory of signs? And so the cognitive side of things really was a big prompt in my pitch to the European Commission, and also from anthropological points of view, how many times did we come up to invent writing, and who did it and why? What was the big purpose behind it, if there was one such thing? And also the archaeological question. What is it that, what are the affordances or the preconditions that make a writing system possible in an area, in a certain area, and not in another one? And what I also wanted to do, and this is my specialty, and this is when I can actually talk about me, is to probe into new strategies to decipher writing systems that still are not deciphered, which means that we don't know what languages they're recorded in. We don't know what languages are behind them. And in the ancient world, we'll still see about a dozen writing systems from the ancient world that haven't been deciphered yet. The languages have not been identified. And this is what I've been specializing for many years now, because the Aegean, which is the sort of the area of the Mediterranean surrounding Greece and Cyprus, yields 4 writing systems that haven't been deciphered yet, and they date to the 2nd millennium BC. And one is the famous Festus disk. I'm sure that some of your listeners will know what I mean when I say the Festus disk. But also writing systems that belong to the same family, Linear A and the Cretan hieroglyphic, and another one which is called Cypreminoan, and it comes directly from Linear A, and we find it on Cyprus, not on Crete. So this is what I've been specializing on, like how writing came about in the Aegean, in this part of the Mediterranean, and to sort of, realize that, well, it is one area and it's relatively quite small, and it yields so many enigmatic, mysterious writing systems. Why is that the case? So I built up a team. I built up a team around all of this, and well, I was really glad and happy that I got the money to do so, because the funding was pretty generous. And when I won the grant, I was interviewed by the most important Italian daily, and many people read that newspaper. So all of a sudden, from my tiny room at La Sapienza, the university where I was at, I was kind of projected onto the resonance of the sort of, big audience kind of thing, the big public. And that was odd for me, because I'm used to working in a sort of a solitary bubble and in an ivory tower, as it were. And that propelled me into writing a book. I was asked by, again, a really big publishing house in Italy to write a book on this. And I discovered that I was having fun writing about things that most people don't know about, in a way that's not professorial at all. I'm a professor at the University of Bologna, and I feel I'm still 17, and I'm not this sort of, dusty, old-fashioned kind of professor. So it was an experiment for me to write like I'm talking to you now, like we're having a cup of coffee and it's early morning, and I'm just telling you what I do and what I like to do.
Yeah, and it's a fantastic book, and as listeners will have links in the show notes and of course in the title. But it's called The Greatest Invention. What is the subtitle? The Greatest Invention.
A history of the world, 9 mysterious scripts.
Right. And so as we progress, I mean, there's so much. There's quite a lot of information in this book. It's not a very long book, but it is packed with lots of amazing insights. And so I think we'll just kind of cover one undeciphered script, one deciphered script. But before we jump into that, I just wanted to, for listeners, your group, which is called Inscribe, that's an acronym. What does that stand for?
Invention of scripts and their beginnings. And that really mirrors what it tries and reflect what I want to do, like, the invention of writing, but also the beginnings and how, we come to this big invention, but also how we want to discover new things through cutting edge research. And I forgot to say that we are also using some techniques to decipher undeciphered scripts from the ancient world that are not traditional. They're not the old-fashioned traditional ways of like paleography and script analysis and sign analysis. We're also using deep neural networks and computers. So we're using methods that are drawn from computer science quite a lot, and we're building 3D models of the inscriptions from the Aegean, because this kind of helps us to see the nooks and crannies of every sign. And it's really, really important for us to understand with precision and accuracy what shapes we're dealing with. And the accuracy that the 3D modeling enables us to have is quite fantastic. So we can distinguish a sign almost automatically, a sign that's very similar to another one, but it's kind of different at the same time. So we see the differences and the convergences in the shapes of the signs, which is, it sounds like drudgery and sort of tedious work, but it's really, really exciting because it's never been done before.
Yeah, no, it sounds absolutely amazing. Now, if I remember correctly, right now, is your team working on the Mamari tablet?
Yes.
Maybe before we dive in, maybe we should just give listeners what is the Mamari tablet, what is the script on it, maybe just like a minute of context, and then we can talk a bit about what's going on with your work.
I imagine 99% of the people listening to you don't know what the Mamari is.
Honestly, myself included, I did not know about the Rongo Rongo script before reading your book. And, I'm not a professional per se. I'm a guy who hosts a podcast about linguistics and language and, talks to professionals like yourself. But I know some things. I know a fair amount of things for a layperson, so to say, but I did not know about the Rongo Rongo script. So, yeah, let's get into that. And just in case I didn't make it clear in the flow of the real-time conversation, Rongo Rongo is the name of the script found on the Mamari tablet.
So the Rongo Rongo script is one of these undeciphered scripts from the ancient world. It's not so ancient because it dates to the 18th century, really, and we really don't know whether it was invented from scratch on Easter Island, which is an island off of the Pacific coast, off of the coast of Chile. And we don't really know whether it was a script that was invented, we say ex nihilo, from nothing, out of scratch, without any influence from a culture that had writing already. And we really want to understand that. And at the same time, since it's an undeciphered script, we're working on it to try and understand what it says, basically, and what language. Well, we already know what language it may be because it's a local dialect that's still spoken, but very sparsely spoken on the island, which is the Rapa Nui dialect. So we're trying to probe into understanding what sound each sign may represent. And it's sort of like a puzzle to put together, or a crossword kind of, exercise to put together. And I have a researcher that's working on it, and he's brilliant. So what we've done with the Mamari is to build the first 3D model of it in order to correct the transcription and in order to see what the text looks like without any mistakes. Because, when you hand draw an inscription, you're bound to make mistakes because there's your arbitrary interpretation of what a sign may look like. But the scanner, the 3D scanner that we use, the laser scanner, is top-of-the-art, state-of-the-art technology, so that doesn't betray any sort of arbitrariness. It's the real thing. What you see is what you get, or what you get is what you see. So basically, it really helps us to see the signs in their perfect shapes. And the Mamari is one such tablet from the Rongo Rongo script, which is incredibly difficult to read. It's written with these signs that are icons. They resemble things like the script, the Rongo Rongo script from Easter Island has very weird signs. Some of them look like birds and men put together, some monstrous creatures, but they look very benign actually. But its iconicity is very, very, very marked, which means that each sign represents a thing that we can actually recognize. It's got a figurative configuration, which really is, to me, an indirect proof or an indirect piece of evidence to point in the direction of an invention from zero, an invention from scratch, because all the scripts that we know that are originally invented have the same kind of substratum, which is this really strong iconicity, this really strong interface with signs that look like things in the environment of the people that create the script. So it is an incredibly difficult script to crack because there are more than 400 signs, and some people think that it's a syllabary. We kind of think that it isn't, and it is, and I don't want to get into the technicalities of it all, but what we know is that many signs of this script need to converge and be assimilated. There are too many of them. 400 plus is too many of them to build a writing system.
Well, that's very exciting. I'll have to keep up with you and your team's research and work. Maybe we can shift to some universals of scripts. I think that's actually a good segue, talking about the distinguishing characteristics between drawings and signs and iconicity. So maybe let's start with that question. What distinguishes a drawing from a sign? And what is iconicity? I just repeated myself. So yeah, let's roll with
Right,
that.
you start with the most difficult question of it all because of the whole shebang, I have to say. It is really, really difficult to draw the line by which we can say that's not a drawing anymore, and pardon the pun, but yes, that's not a drawing anymore. It becomes acquiring a sound. And I'm kind of struggling with that myself because I've just written another book for the same publishing house that published The Greatest Invention here in Italy, which is called Il Salto, which translates into the leap. And I wanted, being a student of writing systems, what I wanted to do is to go back in time and see the roots of writing. And the more I study and the more I look into the question, the more I see that there are trajectories, let's say, paths that point much to a phase that's much earlier than the earliest instances of writing when it was first invented. So the whole thing, the whole idea of a sign that becomes a sound and a written sound should go back to the Paleolithic, should go back to the earliest instances of drawings that we see in caves, for instance, from France and Spain, but also Australia, also Indonesia. And I've been studying those, and I'm seeing patterns, and I'm seeing things that I wasn't expecting to see.
You're seeing patterns in shapes. What is precisely what?
Yes. I see shapes that are geometric and schematic that really have to do with our interface, our cognitive interface with how we perceive the world and how our brain perceives icons and shapes around us, which must bring about the idea of an affordance. Some shapes are more usable than others. They're easy on the eye, and therefore they will be selected by the eye to be part of an inventory of things. And those things may have a sound or not. We don't know, and we will never know. But if I draw a contour picture, a contour drawing of a horse, and I'm already capable of uttering things and realizing phonetic articulations with my mouth and with my voice, and I have a system that I can call speech and a more sophisticated and complex system that I can call language, and I call it that by convention. I call a horse, I have a logogram. And that is not a writing system. That is not a finite, definitive, tidy package. It's not that, but it's something that works in that direction. And therefore, the big question for me is, when do we draw the line? When is it that prompt, that leap, that quantum discovery takes place, for that affordance to take place, for that realization to take place, that we can use a drawing and call it something that's conventional and then reuse it in a system that we can call writing, because it's got a finite shapes that can be tied to then a grammar and a syntax.
And if I may interrupt you very quickly, would you mind defining logogram for listeners?
Well, a logogram is any part of a system of signs that refers or can be identified to a morpheme. And a morpheme is the smallest unit in a grammatical pattern. In other words, if I say a word such as unattainable, I have three morphemes because I have the negative, I have the root of the verb to attain, and I have the adjective ending, which is able. So I will have three morphemes there. And if I can render the word unattainable with a picture, I will have a logogram of three separate things, but it's still a logogram. If I draw a horse, I call it horse, I refer to that morpheme in my language, which is cavallo in Italian and horse in English. So basically, it's a sign that refers to one word, but that word is part of a specific language.
As we think about how as scripts, the earliest scripts probably got off the ground and sort of made this quantum leap that you're talking about. My understanding from your text is that the rebus plays a very important part in this. So, yeah, again, sort of let's start with a simple definition. What is a rebus? And then talk about how this got incorporated into early scripts and, it sort of exploded from there as this small seed.
Yes, I find, but I'm not the only one that finds this quite compelling. That rebus may be they may be the mechanism whereby scripts are built at the very beginning. And we're talking about the original scripts, of course, in the cases in which we see original scripts happening in the world, which is Mesopotamia, as we said, also China, also Egypt, and Mesoamerica with the Maya. And the rebus principle is very simple. You have a drawing of a thing which you can recognize, and you can recognize it and call it by its name. Say, I draw the picture of a sun, and I call it sun. But that word, that sign, can be also called sun, which is a completely different semantic field. It's a completely different meaning from the sun that you see in the sky. So it's got the same sound, roughly, but the same shape, can represent both things, which are semantically unconnected. So this is an easy way to extend the meaning of signs, because if I use the shape of the sun in the context in which I'm talking about the sun and the moon, I can also use that very same shape in a context in which I'm talking about, sons and daughters and fathers and mothers. So it's extendable. You can use one sign for two things that are completely unrelated semantically, but sound the same. So my idea, but it's not just mine, of course, is that all writing systems at first use it, and they use it quite easily, quite speedily. And that is the first thing that they do, to prompt a mechanism that builds a repertoire of signs. And it's so easy, it comes so natural, it's so spontaneous. We play with words. These are puns, son. If I say, sorry to be, uncouth, but if I say son of a bitch, I can represent that with the sun and a beach, right? And they are assonant. So I can sort of use signs for different contexts, which I find a compelling thing to do, because it's just so spontaneous, and it's got a twist because it's got a sense of humor too. We tend to think of writing as this mechanical thing that translates language into visible signs, but it's quite there's nothing artificial about it. It's not something that we did sitting around a table and deciding that it should be channeled into the inventory of signs and that should be excluded. It's a very lively thing that may be very slow in the making, maybe quite fiddly, maybe quite imprecise, and maybe full of deficits and full of things, shortcomings, of course. It's a man-made thing, so it's not perfect. But it is something that, has sprung quite naturally from our cultural evolution. It's not the same as language, which is an innate capacity. It's an innate ability. It's something
but it's social. It's not contrived in the sense of, there are some examples of contrived deliberate scripts, but generally speaking, scripts that emerge organically from cultures, they're but like you said, slowly developed and first and foremost social in their nature, which is to say, maybe you could say better what I'm trying to say, but it's basically consensus. Like it's not like there's someone from on high who says here's the way it is. These are used over time, and like you said, they developed these deficits because it's a group project. Maybe group project is the term I'm looking for. Am I onto
Definitely,
something?
definitely. It's not something that's done in solitude, let me use the same image, in an ivory tower. It's something that needs harmony between people and groups that decide that that thing works and that thing can be an effective instrument, not just of control, but of sharing and communicating information and communicating poetry and works of art and masterpieces of the past. I mean, it's not something that is imposed. I mean, there are ways in which, in our past history, writing systems have been imposed. I'm thinking of Turkey and Ataturk and the big reform that he
Yeah, right.
that was a successful thing, using the Latin Roman alphabet to write a language that has nothing to do with Indo-European and the Romance languages. That was an imposition. That was a top-down imposition, but it worked, and somebody called it a catastrophic success. But I'm trying to think of other instances in which writing system was imposed from a top, and I can't think of any.
Quick note, let's not equate the imposition of writing systems with the imposition of language itself. Languages get imposed from the top down all the time, particularly in colonial scenarios, but it's rare for a ruler or a committee to take a language written in an existing script and then mandate the replacement of that script with another.
Um, it is a social experiment at first, and then it becomes a social practice and a social habit because people realize that it has an application, that rebus principle can be extended through the signs and the sign list and work quite nicely, and then that phenomenon that is writing can be used to an end, to a purpose, and to a goal, which is to write things down. But we tend to think of writing as something that was built around bureaucracy and administration, and I go dead against that stance. I don't think that writing should be tied necessarily to accounting and managing of the ins and outs of a state. There are very many instances in which we can see writing adopted or invented for purposes that are different from that.
Well, you just gave me just going back a couple of minutes. It almost gave me goosebumps. The idea that this invention, like there could have been a first mover, like someone had to be the first person somewhere in a given culture to use the rebus. And just thinking maybe they're around a table eating dinner, and he or she has a tablet, or some whatever medium of expressing these signs might be, a rock, a stone, whatever it is, and he or she writes in again, we'll use English as an example, but it wouldn't have been English. They write a sun and a beach, and it's like a joke. It's like, oh, what am I trying to say? And it's like a game, and then they go around the table, and then they guess it, and they say, oh, ho, wasn't that clever? And they don't think anything of it, and then 10, 20 years later, somehow those signs are still around. They get modified. And obviously I'm thinking this is like stretched out across generations. But I think what you're saying is this kind of game-like humor, very very human, organic scenario could actually be how writing was first invented in this kind of way. Am I putting words in your mouth, or is that kind of right?
No, I like the picture that you're building. I like it. It's not, it's not science fiction to see it that way. Um, Definitely the rebus was the first spark. It takes a village to have a writing system in place and to make it usable and transmissible. You need a school, you need the institution, you need the help of.
Oh, sure. I'm just envisioning like day one. How did it happen? They're around dinner. Here's my game. What am I trying to say?
Day one is what we do every day, because we do that every single day. We play with words. And there's nothing funny about it. It may be funny eventually, but the mechanism behind all of this is not funny. It's got to do with our cognitive architecture, our cognitive structure, our software, our mental plasticity and capacity for abstraction as well. So there's nothing funny about that. But the first, let's say that the trampoline was that one. The trampoline was that one. That was a prompt. That was the thing that sort of goaded the invention into being. And I like to see it that way. I like it to see, I like to see it as something that has a spark and then a segue, as you would say, that is more structured, that is more channeled into institutionalized fruition, let's put it that way. So yes, I definitely, if that's your question, absolutely.
We've really spent a lot of time sort of talking about very general and very big and broad principles. So in effort to keep this conversation around 45 minutes, let's shift gears, if you don't mind, and talk a little bit about Crete and the undeciphered scripts there.
Oh, Crete is bang in the middle of the Med, and it's a fascinating island because in the second millennium BC it becomes a hub of creativity, and this creativity is socio-cultural, political, incredibly complex and incredibly lively and rich. It yields 4 writing systems that are undeciphered: the Cretan hieroglyphic, which seems to be the first, the earliest, Linear A, which is closely connected to Cretan hieroglyphic, the Festus disc, and which is a unicum. It's just one instance of this script, which is very odd, and a Linear B. And Linear B was deciphered by a British architect in 1952 into an early form of ancient Greek, which is earlier than Homer by 500 years, roughly. But the other 4 scripts are completely undeciphered. We don't know what language or languages they may have recorded. And Homer, the poet, talks about Crete as a multi-linguistic kind of setup where different people spoke different languages. And the evidence points in that direction. These scripts look quite dissimilar from one another. And it's not so far-fetched to think that they may record different languages. But of course, we have no sort of, counterproof. We have no litmus test to tell us whether that's the case before we can actually decipher the scripts. And there are so few inscriptions that it's really, really difficult to make any progress. And in 120 years since they were first discovered, little progress has been made into actually identifying the languages behind the scripts. So it's really all work in progress and quite high risk. But we're not the only ones, of course. I mean, Inscribe is at it, but there are many other scholars that are trying to. Well, some of these scholars are quite resigned. They think that, given the fact that we have so few inscriptions, there's no point in even trying. I'm an inveterate optimist, and I think that some progress can be made, the extent of which I can't really probe into nor talk about as it is. But I think there's scope to understand more, to cast light on these writing systems, and definitely to understand them in their internal structures much better. Believe it or not, there is no consensus over how many signs are comprised in the inventory of signs in the Cretan hieroglyphic. There is a big debate because the Cretan hieroglyphic has an inherent and quite big iconic series of signs, and I mean, we've just said that writing systems that have that iconicity, that strong iconicity, may point in the direction of a new invention. And many people think that a Cretan hieroglyphic is a new script, that it's not derived from the Egyptian hieroglyphs, even though the name was kind of coined to evoke that that influence. But more and more we think of it as a new script, as a script that's locally invented, of course with some knowledge of writing, some vague idea that writing existed, that it did the job that it did. But given the fact that it's so iconic and so based on icons, it's quite different from Linear A, which looks much more schematic than Cretan hieroglyphic. And it's really important to build, sort of reconstruct the relationship between the two scripts in a proper scientifically based way to gauge whether we're talking about two different scripts that record two different languages, or whether they are the same language written in two different styles. And my hunch is that we're moving towards the first scenario, that we're dealing with two different languages. But, I mean, the research is ongoing. We just published it. Jury is still out. We'll see what happens. But it wouldn't be incompatible to see different languages on the island of Crete. Homer may be right, and Homer may be a mirror of the reality of spoken language on the island in the second millennium BC.
Well, maybe as the last thing that we talk about, since we're on Crete, I think a lot of listeners are probably interested in how the hell anyone actually has gone about deciphering any of these scripts. Like, we're sort of talking about it in abstract terms. So I don't want you to feel rushed, but in a succinct way, maybe can we talk about how decipherment works? I mean, particularly with Linear B on Crete. Like, yeah, how did that happen?
Well, the decipherment of Linear B is the only instance of decipherment that didn't have any external aid from a bilingual inscription. What Michael Ventris did was, with the help of other scholars, of course, let's not forget Alice Kober, who was a teacher at Brooklyn College in New York. She laid the foundation for Michael Ventris to sort of, leap into the decipherment and the process of deciphering. But what Michael Ventris did eventually was to assign phonetic values, sounds, to the signs through an internal reconstruction, without the aid of bilinguals, without any external assistance. And what he did was quite momentous, because what he did was build statistical grids of the position of the signs in the sequences, in the words, to see to what extent he could understand the phonetic realization. And knowing that the script was a syllabary, and it was an open kind of syllabary, the syllables are built on the format of consonant plus vowel, like ka, da, ma, na, etc., and simple vowels. And the first thing that he did was to do a statistical analysis of all the positional distribution of all these signs and build a grid to understand how all these signs interacted with each other. And then he produced, I don't want to be too tedious, but he was quite lucky, I have to say, because there were loads of repetitions in the inscriptions in Linear B, and he could see that there was an inflectional pattern. In fact, it was Alice Kober, the one that spotted the inflectional pattern. In other words, you had a repeated series of roots which were followed by different endings. And these endings, just like in Latin or in Greek, these endings changed in accordance to the case that was being represented. So you would have the nominative for the subject, the genitive for the property marker, the dative for the destination, etc. So he could see that the words changed in accordance to a structure. There was a pattern to the folly of Linear B. And he could see that given that you had a syllabic scheme, a syllabic pattern, you could have at the end different consonants and different vowels according to which case you were dealing with. In other words, let me give you a very simple example. In Latin, you have a word which means master, which is dominus, from which you have to dominate. And the genitive of that, the property marker, is domini. And in a syllabic pattern, dominus, domini, you would see that the N stays the same. So you have nus that stays the same as ni, the N stays the same in the last syllable, but the vowel changes. The U is different from the I that you see in the genitive. And therefore he and Alice Kober built a scheme in which the vowel would change and the consonant would stay the same. And that vowel changing was the prompt to realize that you had declensions, that you had a flexional pattern. And he was very, very lucky again, because he saw that many repetitions coincided or ended up coinciding with words that were toponyms, they were place names from Crete. And he could see that some of them started with an A. And if you have a syllabic or a syllabary which has separate vowels for its repertoire, separate vowels, a series of vowels for as a separate series. Sorry. He realized that you, at the beginning of words, you would have an initial vowel separate from the rest. So let's say if I want to write down in a syllabic pattern Amanda, or the Latin verb amare, that A will be singled out. It will be isolated from the rest because there's a series for signs, for vowels, which just record the vowel, the simple vowel. And he realized that there was a constant repetition of a sequence for the port of Knossos, the palace of Knossos, the palace of Minos. And the port, the harbor of Knossos, is called Amnisos. And he saw the repetition Aminiso, Aminisi, etc. And that was one of the first things that sort of created a domino effect. He could apply phonetic values to the A. He could apply phonetic values to all his charts that had the nus, the ni, etc. So that made it easier because he had an architecture that was very, very regular. He had a scheme. He had indicators that things pointed in the direction of a known language, which is not a case with several writing systems that I'm dealing with. Maybe they don't record languages that we know, that are known. But he, despite his suspicion that the script was actually recording the Etruscan language, he had to admit to himself quite in a surprising way that it was Greek, that it was an early form of Greek. And it took him not a very long time to get to that realization that kind of, crashed his castle of cards. He was sure that the writing system recorded a sort of a pre-Hellenic language, but he thought that it belonged to he calls it a Pelasgian substratum, which may, in his view, it was tied to the Etruscans. Yeah, so he had to admit to himself that his first suspicion was actually wrong because the hard data was pointing in the direction of Greek, of ancient Greek.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. It's just so crazy to me. But I may wind up cutting this bit out, but this is just for my knowledge. So all syllabaries have an isolated vowel set outside of the consonantal combinations, and so that is how that was sort of key. That's like that bit was taken for granted. Like if this is a syllabary, then we will have isolated vowels, and sort of just operating on that assumption. That's how this code was like initially cracked.
Yes, I mean, think about it this way. If you have a sign that's only in initial position within a word sequence, only in that,
Maya, I get it. I get it.
it has to be a vowel because if it's within the sequence, then it's incorporated, it's married, it's tied to a consonant because that's the way that the syllabary works. And this is the way that most syllabaries work. They have this constant consonant plus vowel pattern, which again, it's a very natural thing. That's how we acquire language in the first place, ma, 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 da, 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 etc. So we articulate syllables of that kind quite easily, quite naturally and spontaneously. And it's not far-fetched to think that, syllabaries, when writing is first invented, they work like that.
Got it.
So, and think for instance of Chinese. Chinese, which again is a script that's invented from scratch at the end of the second millennium BC. It's a tonal language. It has different meanings for, homophony rebus is at play all over the place. Like think of the word ma. The ma, again, it means horse. Sorry, this is completely coincidental that I use the same example, but it means horse, it means mother, it means 3 or 4 other things. Point being that you have one syllable that has the same sound for different meanings. Homophony is just so rampant in Chinese, as it is in English. English may have really, really odd, long, complicated syllables, but homophony is really, really easy to put in place. It's the orthography of English, which is a nightmare, and I say it as a, as an acquired learner of English. So, point being that syllabic pattern is the very core of our utterances, the very core.
Silvia, thank you so much for this discussion. I think you're doing absolutely amazing work. I don't really have anything else. I don't have anything else to say other than I just really think this is extremely fascinating stuff. So I guess before we go, very quickly at the end, any listeners who want to learn more about you, your work, where can they find you in, all the places?
All they need to do is to Google inscribe invention of scripts at the beginnings. And there's a whole website with the 3D models of the inscriptions that we've done. And there's a viewer, which is very much, it's so super user-friendly. It's really fun to use. They can write to me. My name is Silvia Ferrara, and I work at Bologna University, so they can Google my name.
All right, well, that's it for today's conversation. I hope you found it as fascinating as I did. To pick up a copy of Silvia's book, you can follow the link in the show notes, and if you want to support me and the output of this show, there's also that Patreon link in the show notes. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, and I'll talk to you next time here at Words for Granted.